Part 3, Giving and Receiving Inspiration. Chapter 10, Absorbing the Inspiration of Others. Quote, "A man may have never entered a church or a mosque, nor performed any ceremony, but if he realizes God within himself and is thereby lifted above the vanities of the world, that man is a holy man, a saint, call him what you will." Unquote. That's from Vivekananda, a great Indian saint. What inspirational people are not. It's possible for someone to achieve at a high level, earn many accolades, be widely admired and respected, but not be living from spirit. Inspirational people aren't necessarily highly motivated in society's sense of the word. After all, such individuals may just be chasing after more symbols of success, satisfying their desire to dominate and control others by acquiring as much power as possible. People who have motivated us are not necessarily inspirational. We may have been motivated by those who threatened or beat us or cursed and called us a fool and a wimp for not doing what they thought we should be doing. Clearly, inspiration wasn't part of their motivation. We also can't assume that all teachers are living their ultimate calling. A good instructor might be very knowledgeable about a given subject and extremely effective at conveying that knowledge to students. But he or she might also be very disconnected from God realization. Teachers often have such low self-esteem that they lose themselves completely in devotion to something that's far removed from their true calling, especially when great teaching skills can fill a void and seem to be a substitute for that calling. Of course, I'm not saying that all teachers are lacking in God realization, but be wary of assuming that a gifted instructor is automatically living in spirit. A person may have the highest intellectual credentials available and still be detached from his or her spirit. The ability to cite historical sources, speak with distinction, and earn advanced degrees doesn't automatically mean that someone is capable of inspiring others. Once again, it doesn't disqualify that individual either. The smartest people may turn us off with their pomposity and bragging, or they may be so cerebral that it's difficult to know what they're talking about. Be on the lookout for mistaking intellectualization for inspiration. The journey to our ultimate calling isn't a scholastic endeavor. There are no written exams, no grades to earn, no report cards, and no advanced degrees. It's important to understand that any of the traditional measures of success, such as job promotions, wealth, public acclaim, stylishly expensive clothing, a commanding presence, verbal adeptness, a voluminous vocabulary, a charismatic appearance, fame, and so forth, don't necessarily mean high marks as an inspirational person. In fact, some people who rate very high marks on the ego-based indices of success are the ones I find most difficult to be around and totally uninspiring. While fame, in all of its forms, seems highly desirable and is focused upon by endless television shows discussing the personal lives of those who are in the news, particularly show business, this does not measure the ability to inspire in the slightest. When one of my daughters once told me that her goal was to become famous, I urged her to shift her sights to living and acting in rapport with her passion and then letting the fame thing take care of itself. I've met many celebrities in all fields of endeavor, and I can assure you that public notoriety is not in any way an indicator of a person's connection to spirit. And if I happen to be famous personally, it's not because I chose it or even earned it. Fame is located outside of me. It's in the opinions that others have of me. It's my choice to be inspired, however, and that always involves being independent of the opinions of others. Inspirational people aren't interested in winning a popularity contest, especially when those who seek praise and recognition often do so to soothe the feelings of insecurity. In general, people who doubt their divinity fear being criticized because they see themselves as fraudulent beings. Consequently, they take on the full-time job of trying to be liked by everyone they meet. Despite their obvious popularity, they'd be disastrous in the inspiration department. I need to add a disclaimer here. I don't in any way want to imply that a person who has gained great popularity and notoriety is thereby disqualified from being a source of inspiration. Quite the contrary. Many of the most inspiring people I've come across in my life have achieved worldwide acclaim. I simply urge you not to equate inspiration with recognition. What inspirational people are. When we meet others who we think might be living in spirit, we must ask the following questions. Do they seem to have a rapturous heart, sending out signals that they love the world and everyone in it? Are they jubilant about the work they do? Do they see the world as a friendly place? Are they at peace with themselves? Do they appear to be kind rather than judgmental? Are they confident without being boorish? Do they tend to be cheerful? Do they love to play? Are they elated to be in the company of young children as well as older people? Do they listen rather than lecture? Are they willing to be students as well as teachers? Do they love nature? Are they in awe of the world? Do they express rational humility? Are they approachable? Do they take great pleasure in serving others? Do they seem to have tamed their own egos? Do they accept all people as equals? Are they open to new ideas? The answers to these questions will help us ascertain whether another person is potentially an inspiring influence in our life. Those who have the gift of inspiration exude something that's difficult to pin down intellectually, yet is undeniably recognizable in how we feel in their presence. We can sense that they're aligned with the source energy from which we all originate. We perceive a place within them that resonates deeply within ourselves, a vibrational recognition of inspiration. And they have much to offer us. We recognize their high spiritual energy, which longs to be active in our life. When we feel this resonance, it's reflected in a feeling that's similar to a warm, soothing shower that's running deep within us. When I'm in the presence of an inspiring person, the first thing I notice is this warm shower overtaking me. It's like a wave of energy that slowly moves down my shoulders and spine, and I know something is happening energetically. Even though I can't see, touch, smell, or hear it, I know that I'm experiencing a shift that makes me feel incredibly good, or as I like to think of it, incredibly God. My own personal experiences with inspiring people. In this section, I'd like to further illustrate what inspirational people are by noting some individuals who have particularly impacted my life with their high energy. I vividly recall the days of the Cuban Missile Crisis more than 40 years ago. I'd recently been discharged from active duty in the Navy after 4 years and was attending Wayne State University in Detroit. If the U.S. had been drawn into a war with the USSR, I would have been at the top of the list to be called back to active duty because I had a top-secret job classification. But more than my concern about my own status was what had us collectively biting our fingernails globally. That is, the thought of the consequences of an exchange of nuclear weapons, which would put all of civilization at risk. President Kennedy was a source of inspiration to me, but not because of his political views or any of his presidential actions. Rather, I embraced him as a man who conveyed love, peace, and joy in his demeanor and showed respect for all people by vowing to end segregation in America. As Robert McNamara, Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, once observed, if JFK had lived, there would have been no Vietnam War. That's because he believed that war should be an absolute last resort and that his primary job as president was to maintain the peace. I found JFK inspiring back in the early 60s, and I continue to be profoundly touched by his spirit throughout my lifetime. He inspired me. In 1978, I was invited to go to Vienna to participate in a presentation to a group of young presidents of companies. I was assigned to be on a panel with a man who had been a huge source of inspiration to me, Viktor Frankl. Frankl was a medical doctor who had been herded off to die in a Nazi concentration camp in World War II. While imprisoned, he kept notes that ultimately became a book called Man's Search for Meaning. This work, which touched me deeply many years later, illustrated not only how Dr. Frankl survived the horrors of Auschwitz, but also how he helped other campmates to do the same. For example, he taught his fellow human beings how to find meaning and even joy in a fish head floating in the dirty water that masqueraded as soup. He taught them to be with his spirit and infuse it in others who were giving up on life. He even practiced sending love and peace to his captors and refused to feel hatred and vengeance because he knew that it was foreign to his spirit, which he wouldn't forsake. So, 33 years after his liberation, I was about to address hundreds of corporate presidents who were all under the age of 50, as was I at the time. I had read Man's Search for Meaning as a young doctoral student and practiced Frankl's logotherapy, which taught therapists in training to help clients find meaning in their existence regardless of their circumstances. Viktor Frankl had been one of the truly inspirational figures in my life, and being on the same panel under the pretext of being a colleague of this master teacher was overwhelming to me. And an afternoon I've never forgotten followed, full of pure exhilaration and inspiration. Viktor Frankl stayed true to his spiritual origins in the face of horrors that destroyed so many. When I met him, he exuded joy, peace, kindness, and love, and he wasn't bitter. Instead, he felt that his experience taught him lessons he'd never have known otherwise. I spent a good part of that afternoon in Vienna in 1978, listening and being in awe, and now, years later, I'm still greatly impacted by the presence of this man in my life. Yes, indeed, Viktor Frankl inspired me. In 1994, 24-year-old college student Immaculée Ilibagiza came home to be with her family in Rwanda for the Easter holidays, and inadvertently found herself in the middle of one of the worst genocides in history. As a member of the Tutsi tribe, Immaculée was forced to hide in a tiny bathroom, which was configured in such a way that it appeared to be inaccessible from the house, with 7 other women for a total of 3 terrifying months. As she told me, by the grace of God, we were never found. How that happened, I do not know. All we could hear was the smoke of hatred coming from the men right outside the door. After living in this terror for 90 days, trembling in fear every day, knowing that they would be hacked to death if they were discovered, the women were finally released from their entombment into the protection of French soldiers. As Immaculée related, when we were finally safe, I learned how most of my family had died. My father was shot by soldiers, my mother was killed by machete, and my younger brother was murdered in a stadium while searching for food. My big brother was executed after questioning. They said they wanted to see the brain of a person who had a master's degree, so they cut him to pieces. I met this incredible woman in New York after she was granted an asylum visa as a victim of this organized attempt at ethnic cleansing by a band of thugs. Just about 1 million men, women, and children were systematically slaughtered with machetes or blunt instruments, and the U.S. didn't intervene, something that former President Clinton publicly acknowledged was the greatest failure of his own administration. Immaculée isn't bitter or filled with rage. She merely wants to be sure that such a tragedy never occurs again. She has love in her heart, and she's committed to telling her story, which is published by Hay House. I was privileged to write the foreword for this amazing book, which is titled Left to Tell, Discovering God Amidst the Rwandan Holocaust. Truly one of the most inspiring books I've ever read in my life. I'm honored to join this divinely inspiring woman by going to Rwanda and helping set up a program to educate and provide for the vast number of orphans who were left behind by this genocide. And yes, being in Immaculée's life in the small way that I am inspires me beyond anything that I can convey here to you in words. In 1999, I was invited to South Africa to lecture to some public audiences. While in Cape Town, I took the ferry over to Robben Island to visit the prison where Nelson Mandela had been incarcerated for so many years. I actually visited at the time of the 10th anniversary celebration of his release. Here was a man who spent more than 27 years of his life in prison. He wasn't even allowed visitors because he was a vocal opponent of a system of apartheid in which an entire race of people were declared by law to be inferior and unworthy of the same privileges as the remaining citizens of the country. And he worked all day in a limestone quarry, where the burning sunlight glared so against the white rock that his eyes became mere slits due to the squinting that he was forced to practice in order to survive. I personally spent 30 minutes in that quarry, and my eyes stung all day. Imagine what years of such exposure would wreak. Mandela went deep within himself, and when he was finally released, he came out with forgiveness and reconciliation in his heart. His staying in spirit was the force behind the dismantling of apartheid and his ultimate election to the presidency of an emerging democracy of South Africa a few years later. As I meditated in the prison outside of this great man's cell, I felt the warm inner shower I described earlier in this chapter. Then I was handed an autographed copy of his book, Long Walk to Freedom, which I treasure. Nelson Mandela conveyed the spiritual energy of love, peace, kindness, and tolerance during all of his travails, and this spiritual energy provided a blueprint that changed the face of Africa and the world forever. Yes, Mandela inspired me. Closer to home, I was inspired by Mrs. Olive Fletcher. In 1956, I was taking biology for the second time at Denby High School in Detroit. I'd failed the class the previous year because of my own stubbornness. I'd refused to complete a leaf collection, which my then 15-year-old self perceived to be an absurd requirement. At that time, my mother was divorcing my alcoholic stepfather, and I was working in a local grocery store every evening during the week and all day on Saturday and Sunday. My instructor for this second foray into biology was Mrs. Fletcher, and she was the very first teacher I encountered who seemed to care about me personally. For example, she talked with me after school, called my home to see if I was okay during the tumultuousness, including frequent fights and other unpleasantness, taking place at the time, and allowed me to put my head down and sleep during study periods when I'd completed my assignments. She also encouraged me to tutor other students because she recognized something in me that I'd never heard a teacher say before. She told me that I was brilliant and had a mind that could take me wherever I wanted to go. Thanks to Mrs. Fletcher's inspiration, I went from a failing grade the previous year to an A. I wanted to excel just for her because she had so much faith in me. Now, exactly a half a century later, Mrs. Olive Fletcher still stands out as the one individual in all of my school years who turned the direction of my life from fighting the system to being able to choose to fit in without having to give in. Yes, she inspired me. I could write many more short descriptions of those who provided me with life-altering inspiration, but I'd be remiss if I were to omit the one person among all of those I've known who has been my greatest source of it. Back in 1942, when I was 2 years old, my mother was left to take on the responsibility for raising my two brothers, ages 3 and 5, and me alone. My father, of whom I have absolutely no recollection, literally walked out on his family and never once placed a phone call to see how we were doing. He paid no child support, since he spent a great deal of time in trouble with the law, including some jail time for being a thief. He simply walked away and never looked back. After I was born, my mother brought me home to their tiny apartment on the east side of Detroit and discovered that my father had left my 16-month-old brother Dave in the care of my 4-year-old brother Jim and had temporarily moved in with a woman in Ann Arbor, some 40 miles away. Try to imagine the scene. It's 1940. A depression has left almost everyone economically bankrupt. There are no government programs to aid the support of 3 children under the age of 4. An alcoholic husband refuses to work, steals money from everyone, and regularly chooses the company of other women, leaving his wife to care for their 3 babies. An anemic infant needs medical assistance, which is largely unavailable to anyone living in poverty. Yet out of this seemingly hopeless scenario emerged a woman who had a dream that her life could and would get better. After finally going through the divorce, my mother was totally on her own. She worked first as a candy girl at a 5-and-dime store and then as a secretary for the Chrysler Corporation, and her earnings came to approximately $17 per week. She was forced to place Dave and me in a series of foster homes supported by the Methodist Church while Jim moved in with her parents. Her nightmare was realized. Her family had been split up, and the thought of this being a permanent condition was too devastating for her to contemplate. But she held a vision for herself that she never, ever abandoned. Somehow, someday, I will unite my family and raise my boys under one roof. Unfortunately, times were challenging and the years passed. Mother visited Dave and me whenever possible. She didn't have an automobile or even a driver's license, and the distance to Mount Clemens, where we resided, was approximately 17 miles, but it might as well have been 7,000 miles since there was no transportation or money to pay for her to get there. But my mother was determined. She even married a man she didn't love as a way to unite her family. In 1949, our family moved into a tiny, and I mean tiny, duplex on the east side of Detroit. Like our father, our new stepfather was also an alcoholic and irresponsible provider. Drinking became his escape, and frequent, hostile interchanges were the norm. But my mother, who refused to see her boys separated again, continued to work, and work. Every morning she was up at 5 a.m., making breakfast and packing lunches for her 3 growing boys. She took 3 buses to work and 3 home every day, standing outside on those endless freezing winter mornings and returning home at 5:45 p.m. in order to prepare an evening meal. My brothers and I all had paper routes or were stock boys, but the hard work fell on the shoulders of this never-complaining, always cheerful woman. Every weekend looked like this from my mother. Washing endless loads of clothes and hanging them up on the line to dry, making breakfast, lunch, and dinner, ironing down in the basement on Sundays. The work never ended, and yet this woman was the most joyful, loving, beautiful soul to be around. All my brothers and my friends came to our house to hang out because of my mother. They loved her, and more than that, they loved being in our home because of the energy she brought to it. This woman lived from spirit and offered all of us inspiration. Not one of us would ever have even considered talking back or even being disrespectful in any way. She commanded our respect, but she never demanded it. And with all of the responsibilities she had, my mother never left the house with her hair in curlers or her clothes in disarray. She took great pride in herself, and through her example, she taught my brothers and myself to do the same. While going through a second divorce from a now out-of-control alcoholic, she never abandoned her role as a mother to all of us. In later years, when her own mother was quite sick, I watched in astonished admiration as she took on the sole responsibility for caring for her mom, despite the fact that she had 4 siblings. And then, wonder of wonders, as my ex-stepfather reached a stage where his alcohol and smoking addictions were taking their final toll, I watched in amazement as she cared for this man who had largely mistreated her throughout their marriage. She went to his home, did his laundry, called for medical help, visited him in the hospital, and extended love where she had received only mistreatment and even abuse. Today, my mother approaches the age of 90 and still bowls twice a week, lives on her own, and never complains. To this day, she won't leave home unless she's dressed to her high standards of appropriateness and her hair is beautifully coiffed. She respects herself, and this esteem has trickled down to me, her youngest son, and my 2 brothers as well. Now she has 3 boys who are all eligible for Social Security and Medicare, yet still she lives and breathes that loving spirit. Yes, Mother, you inspire me, and I've dedicated this book to you and to Immaculée. Ramakrishna, a great saint who lived in India and inspired millions of others from his God-realized perspective, once offered this observation. Saints, he said, are like big steamships, which not only cross the ocean themselves but carry many passengers to the other shore. May you too be like those big steamships. But if you're not, then by all means allow yourself to be one of those lucky passengers. Get on board by going on to the next chapter. Chapter 11, Being an Inspiration for Others. Quote, "We are all teachers, and what we teach is what we learn. And so we teach it over and over again until we learn." Unquote. That's from A Course in Miracles. And also, quote, "The real purpose of teachers, books, and teachings is to lead us back to the kingdom of God within ourselves." Joel Goldsmith. Just as we're all students throughout life, we're all teachers. In fact, we learn best by offering what we desire for ourselves to as many individuals as we can, as frequently as we can. And that's one reason I wrote this book and I'm putting together this program. If I instruct enough people for a long enough period of time, I'll teach what I most want to learn, which is how to live in spirit. Following this line of thinking, it's imperative that we make a deliberate effort to increase our inspirational energy, as this will lead us to being both a spiritual learner and teacher simultaneously. Spiritual teachers have raised the vibrational frequency of their daily life to a point where they're able to provide inspiration to others merely by their presence, and this is the standard to which we need to aspire. It isn't necessarily a scholarly undertaking. There are no lesson plans or report cards for this kind of teaching I'm writing about in these pages and that I'm speaking about here in this program. Rather, I'm talking about the things we can do each and every day to inspire our fellow humans, which is what this chapter is all about. Kindness inspires others. Recently, 3 of my kids and I were seated at the food court of a mall here on Maui. As we were talking and enjoying our meals, a young boy stumbled and the tray full of hamburgers and French fries he'd just purchased from McDonald's went flying all over the floor. His parents immediately came to his rescue, and the manager of the restaurant good-naturedly replaced all of the food at no cost. The boy was embarrassed, but it all worked out fine, except that people were having to dodge what he'd dropped as they lined up for their purchases. Neither the boy's family nor the people working at the restaurant took any initiative to clean up this mess, which was actually a hazard to the crowd at the food court. I watched for a few moments, and then I took an empty tray and proceeded to pick up all of the food and dispose of it in the trash container. I returned to my seat, saying nothing about the incident. About 10 minutes later, a woman who'd observed this scene, without my noticing, came over to our table. To my teenage daughters, she said, "You girls have just been given a lesson by your father. He has shown you by his actions what it means to be a caring, helpful citizen. No one else in this entire place thought of doing anything about that mess on the floor, but he did. He inspired me, and I hope that you were inspired by his actions too." Unquote. She left, and my girls sort of smiled knowingly, since this is rather a normal thing for them to see. The point of this story is to illustrate that one simple act of kindness and service that's in alignment with our source will do more to inspire others than lectures on the virtues of being a thoughtful citizen ever could. All I wanted to do was to eliminate the potential peril of greasy burgers and fries on the floor. I wasn't trying to inspire anyone, and that's the crux of this chapter. When we elevate our consciousness above the level of ego, which says, "I didn't spill that food, so it's not my job to clean it up," to the level that asks, "How may I serve?" we become an inadvertent source of inspiration to anyone who's in the energy field of our spiritually based actions. We can also be on the lookout for opportunities to be a source of inspiration. For example, when I board an airplane, I tend to look for the chance to extend some sort of service to strangers. I put the word strangers in quotations in the book to emphasize there aren't actually any strangers anywhere in the universe. Helping vertically challenged passengers place their carry-on luggage in the overhead compartment is perfect because others noticing this kind of kindness may be inspired, while at the same time I'm heeding my own calling to be both inspired and inspiring. Gratitude inspires others. Without exception, I begin every day of my life with an expression of gratitude. As I look in the mirror to begin my daily ritual of shaving, I say, "Thank you, God, for life, for my body, for my family and loved ones, for this day, and for the opportunity to be of service. Thank you, thank you, thank you." If we practice gratitude as opposed to maintaining an attitude of entitlement, we'll automatically extend inspiration wherever we go. Being grateful helps remove the influence of our ego, which is certain that we're better than everybody else. An attitude of gratitude allows us to adopt what's called radical humility, a trait that's very persuasive in helping others feel inspired. Most of the people I've met or observed who are at the top levels in their chosen fields have these attitudes of gratitude and radical humility. After all, when so many high achievers reach for their statuette or championship trophy, they often say, "First, I'd like to thank God." It's almost as if they can't help themselves. They're so grateful for their accolade, but even more than that, they know that there's a force in the universe way bigger than they are that allows them to act or sing or write or compete or design. And if we adopt this kind of an attitude, we'll inspire others. It's that simple. Generosity inspires others. It doesn't matter if we call it God, Krishna, Atman, Allah, the universal mind, Ra, Yahweh, or even Anna or Fred. I think we'd all agree that the all-creating source of everything is the most generous being there is. Along with life itself, it offers us unending abundance in the form of air, water, lungs, heart, kidney, liver, and all we need to sustain life. On just this one tiny planet hurtling through space, whatever name we want to call it, it provides the ability to feed all of us and dispose of all of our waste, which then gets used to fertilize new life and then repeats the process over and over and over again. And remember, this is only one planet in an endless universe of heavenly bodies. Talk about benevolence. Generosity is obviously one of the ways to be more godlike. I know that I'm inspired when I see evidence of it on the part of others. Very often it's manifested during or following times of crisis, almost as if God gets our attention and reminds us to be more like Him when we face devastating circumstances. A tsunami diverts our aircraft carriers away from killing each other and into a zone where food and shelter are offered. An earthquake motivates us to risk our own lives to save strangers who days before were called enemies. And hurricanes bring out the best in us. Such so-called disasters lead us to the inherent godlike generosity that's latent within all of us. However, we don't need a crisis to remind ourselves to give. We only need to be in spirit to be reminded of the joy of donating our energy, time, and possessions to others. Listening inspires others. As ironic as it may sound, we're far more inspiring to others when we're willing to listen than when we're giving them advice. That's because conveying to others that we value what they have to say is a way of demonstrating that we care. It's a way of being inspiring, a way of listening like God. People who find it difficult to listen to another person without bringing the conversation back to themselves are convinced by their ego of their self-importance. And as you're well aware by now, that ego is an illusion that's convinced us to pay attention to a false self. There's no higher compliment than to be told we're a good listener. Everyone loves a good listener, largely because it makes them feel loved, cared for, and worthy of being heard. When we leave any encounter where we feel we've been heard, even if we know the listener strongly disagreed with us, we're still inspired. Why? Because for a few moments the listener has emulated what it feels like when we pray. In deep prayer, we're not looking for the resolution of conflict or answers falling from the sky. We just want to feel as if we're in contact with someone who cares enough to hear us out. This brings to mind something Mahatma Gandhi, one of the truly inspirational beings of our time, once said: "Silence of the sewn-up lips is no silence. One may achieve the same result by chopping off one's tongue, but that would not be silence. He is truly silent who, having the capacity to speak, utters no idle word." In addition, these words from Ralph Waldo Emerson have always reminded me to be a listener. "I like the silent church before the service begins better than the preaching," he said. This is great advice if we wish to be a source of inspiration. Being at peace inspires others. Being at peace with ourselves is a way of going through life eschewing conflict and confrontation. When we're in a state of tranquility, we actually send out a vibration of energy that impacts all living creatures, including plants, animals, and all people, even babies. And of course, the reverse applies as well. Belligerent individuals who live in turmoil and revel in hostile encounters send out nonverbal energy that adversely impacts those around them. The immediate impulse is to remove ourselves from these low-energy, non-peaceful people because sticking around means tension and a lowering of our own energy. Moreover, we become a counterforce to what we're experiencing, meaning that we become angry at their anger and arrogant toward their arrogance. Practicing a peaceful approach to our life on earth is a way of returning to where we came from. At the same time, it's a powerful source of inspiration to all living creatures. Living passionately inspires others. Did you know that the word enthusiasm originated from the Greek language signifying the God within us? By definition, then, living our passion is the way to convey to others how to be in spirit. Being excited about life is infectious. It rubs off on others and is wonderfully inspiring. I'm reminded of a recent whale-watching trip I took where I observed a young woman I know named Beth as she spoke to a group of people about humpback whales. Her enthusiasm was palpable to the entire group aboard the boat, and the more passion she displayed, the more she seemed to inspire her audience. I've been aboard other boats and seen the impact of guides who merely go through the motions. People in this low-energy environment don't leave the experience feeling inspired. Beth, on the other hand, feels a passion that she conveys to others every single day during the whale mating season. Every day. You see, she studied marine biology in college and has always been fascinated by humpback whales and their amazing ability to travel between Alaska and Hawaii, to go 6 months without eating, to give birth in warm waters, and then navigate to cold waters on the return. For Beth, these whales are a part of God's mysterious, miraculous creation. She's living her passion, and she inspires others by her enthusiastic way of being. In fact, everyone in this vicinity knows that expeditions with Beth are almost a guarantee that you'll not only get to see the whales, but that they'll dance and breach and even swim under the boat for you. It's as if the whales themselves are inspired by Beth's excitement. When we're enthusiastically living our passion, whatever it may be, we transmit spiritual signals to those around us that we're in spirit, loving who we are, what we came here to be, and whoever comes into our field of vision. And finally, truth inspires others. Perhaps most urgently, we need to live and breathe truth because nothing inspires other people more than being in its energy field. Years ago, I wrote an article called "Who Do You Trust?" in which I explained that the trust issue rests on who we seek out when we want truth. Are we drawn to those who will tell us what we want to hear, or those who are unafraid to be honest with us, even if it might be unpleasant or difficult for us to hear? The answer is obvious. We prefer to hear the truth. Honesty is a necessity if we're ever to live in harmony with spirit and become a source of inspiration for others as well. When we shade the truth, a part of our brain registers this incongruity. It shows up as a disconnect from God, and we're out of balance. Our body reacts by becoming weaker in the face of any falsehood, including our attachment to the false self known as the ego. As we practice living and speaking from our truth, without being hurtful or arrogant in any way, we reconnect with the energy we emanated from in the first place. So let's remember truth as a means for inspiring each other. We must be unafraid to live and speak our truth. Think how inspiring we'd all be for each other if honesty was a prominent feature of our interactions. By demonstrating 100% commitment to truth, with no exceptions, we send out a signal that we're in accord with our source and will do more to inspire others to live and breathe from their own truth than 1,000 readings of the Ten Commandments or any other written document. Truth and God are one. We don't have to preach it, only live it. By doing so, we'll radiate it to everyone we come into contact with. As an ancient Hindu saying reminds us, the name of God is truth. Chapter 12. Transcending Commonplace, Uninspiring Energy. Quote, "For all our insight, obstinate habits do not disappear until replaced by other habits. No amount of confession and no amount of explaining can make the crooked plant grow straight. It must be trained upon the trellis by the gardener's art." That was Carl Jung. And another quote from William Wordsworth, "Habits rule the unreflecting herd." Thanks to the world we live in, we've developed many habits that are the direct result of living almost exclusively in ego rather than in spirit. This chapter will stress how to gain awareness of these ego habits, how to immediately protect ourselves from these onslaughts, and how to develop alternate strategies to ensure that we remain connected to spirit, even in the face of a blitzkrieg that's designed to take us away from living an inspired life. I'm not suggesting that there's a conspiracy to keep us from living in spirit. My contention is simply that when a majority of society members are raised and persuaded to believe in the illusion of ego, then that society will develop and evolve firmly committed to that false self. It would then be natural for such a society to put forth messages designed to promote the idea of the importance of ego and all of its inherent ideas, and we're fully immersed in such a society right now. Ego's warriors. Let's take a look at some of the habits that rule the herd, in the words of William Wordsworth. Following are several omnipresent, lacking in inspiration entities that join up with ego to bombard us daily and that we need to become aware of. The media. A century or so ago, long before the media became such an active force in our lives, the news was almost exclusively received from one's village. Bad news was rare and tended to only involve accidents or natural disasters such as fire, flood, drought, or the occasional crime perpetrated by someone in the community. For the most part, one's daily life was consumed by work and family interaction. Any kind of news was essentially information about the village and was primarily communicated by word of mouth. Today, however, it's a very different picture. We've created a society that sends out specially trained people to scour the globe for depressing bulletins that are delivered to us wherever we are. The news is now available at home, at work, in our car, at the gym, on airplanes, standing in line at the bank, in the hospital, and on portable devices wherever we go. We're now able to directly tune in to the reports of those organizations who search for information designed to make us feel bad, that is, removed from spirit, which is all about feeling good or feeling God. We're constantly subjected to this army of bad news collectors who gather and disseminate low vibrational energy for our consumption. Keeping in mind that being inspired is about feeling good and returning to our source of love, it's imperative to become aware of what we're allowing into our consciousness. These bad news assemblers are on a mission to convince us of the inherent evil in the world. They can't possibly believe that we live in a friendly universe, and they seem determined to convince us that their illusion is the truth. The defense against a media blitz of uninspiring energies is to remind ourselves that we want to feel good, in the sense that good and God are synonymous. We can't feel bad enough to change any of the bad news we're exposed to, nor can we eliminate hatred in the world by feeling hateful. We can't do anything positive or loving by joining those who've elected to live in these energies or even those who broadcast it to us nonstop. However, by feeling good, that is, by feeling God, we have an opportunity to be a small force that can transcend and convert lower energies into spiritual ones. The world of advertising. Everywhere we turn, we're a target of someone wanting to sell us something. There are advertisements on buses, in the backseat of cabs, at the movies, on telephone poles, on our cell phones, After every click of our computers, on the radio and television for more than a third of the airtime, in more than 50% of magazine pages, in most cases anyway, while we're on hold on the telephone and even in restrooms. It's difficult to escape this assault on our senses and our spirit as well. Behind this huge blitz that's aimed at us during every waking moment of our lives is the idea that we need to purchase something in order to be fixed or to be complete. Madison Avenue just keeps telling us that we'll overcome our deficiencies and be happier and more fulfilled if we simply buy whatever it is they're selling. The essential message behind this juggernaut is that we need more in order to be happy. Coincidentally, the mantra of the ego is just that: more, more, more. What I'm suggesting is that we can be free from the push to convince us that we need more, while still being able to enjoy the material aspects of the world. In other words, we know that we don't need more, and at the same time, we're free to live happily and enjoy our world the way it is. I want this distinction to be clear because it's fun enjoying a new automobile, or well-made clothes, or dinner in a nice restaurant, an expensive piece of jewelry, or anything else that might be advertised, including this program. What we want to avoid is the inner belief that somehow our true essence is lacking if we don't get the things we're being encouraged to buy. We must also guard against allowing the stuff to define our worthiness, which is what advertisers are frequently attempting to convey. Entertainment. As we progress toward a more inspired life, we'll begin to notice that the activities we've called entertainment have actually been leading us away from being in spirit. Since everything that we allow into our life represents an energy that impacts us both physically and spiritually, it's imperative to raise our awareness level and defend against the habits that deter us from being in spirit. It's vital that we're conscious of the following big four, which are really low-level energies masquerading as entertainment and are obstacles to anyone's ultimate calling to inspiration. 1. Violence. On average, children in America see 12,000 simulated murders in their own home on commercial and cable television before their 14th birthday. And virtually all movies made to appeal to a younger audience have grim killings, explosions, and chase scenes built into the storyline, which seems to consist of guns, 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 and kill, kill, kill. The more gruesomely, the better. These decidedly uninspiring messages continually bombard all of us when we're supposedly experiencing uplifting entertainment, but we can do something about it. If enough of us decide that this is not going to be on our daily menu, then the manufacturers of this kind of recreational material would bring it all to a halt. For example, if more of us were aware of the content of the video games that our kids play, many of which simulate rape, torture, and even murder, we wouldn't permit them in our homes. Yet there are alternatives available to us. First on this list is screening our entertainment options for violence and making a commitment to choose only those pastimes that are free of any energy that doesn't match our desire to be in spirit or inspired. Our Creator creates out of love, kindness, and peace. So if we clear opposite energies out of our life, we'll almost immediately feel inspiration returning to our life. What follows is one of the most poignantly inspiring letters I've ever read, written by my dear friend Ram Dass to the parents of a young girl who'd been brutally murdered. Even in such horrific circumstances, Ram Dass was able to provide inspiration. I reproduced this moving letter with Ram Dass's permission in order to help you see how it's possible to transcend violence with inspiring spiritual energy. Dear Steve and Anita, Rachel finished her work on earth and left the stage in a manner that leaves those of us left behind with a cry of agony in our hearts as the fragile thread of our faith is dealt with so violently. Is anyone strong enough to stay conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? Probably very few. And even they would only have a whisper of equanimity and peace amidst the screaming trumpets of their rage, grief, horror, and desolation. I can't assuage your pain with any words, nor should I, for your pain is Rachel's legacy to you. Not that she or I would inflict such pain by choice, but there it is. And it must burn its purifying way to completion, for something in you dies when you bear the unbearable, and it is only in that dark night of the soul that you are prepared to see as God sees, and to love as God loves. Now is the time to let your grief find expression, no false strength. Now is the time to sit quietly and speak to Rachel, and thank her for being with you for these few years, and encourage her to go on with whatever her work is, knowing that you will grow in compassion and wisdom from this experience. In my heart, I know that you and she will meet again and again, and recognize the many ways in which you have known each other. And when you meet, you will know, in a flash, what now it is not given to you to know, why this had to be the way it was. Our rational minds can never understand what has happened, but our hearts, if we keep them open to God, will find their own intuitive way. Rachel came through you to do her work on earth, which includes her manner of death. Now her soul is free, and the love that you can share with her is invulnerable to the winds of changing time and space. In that deep love, include me. In love, Ram Dass. I can't imagine a more inspirational letter being written at such a time of such difficulty. Typical of my dear friend Ram Dass. 2. Hatred. Much of our entertainment dollar is spent watching malice, hatred, and hostility in some form. Now, in my opinion, there's far too much animosity in our world, so I have no desire to sit through a movie or listen to a song that repeatedly describes how one group hates another. Martin Luther King Jr., one of my personal heroes, said that the only way to convert a perceived enemy into a friend is by love. Since we know that hatred itself breeds more of the same, then being exposed to it, even when it's dressed up as entertainment, is something to be cognizant of when we choose a film, a television show, a sporting event, a play, or a book. Any hateful message is non-spiritual energy that we're exposing ourselves to, and the more we consciously allow, the more we'll be inclined to attract it into our own lives. The moral of all of this is that entertainment can be uplifting and edifying, or it can be demoralizing and debasing. So where do we want our energy to flow? And even more important, what kind of energy do we want our children to experience? We must be on guard against any entertainment that uses excessive profanity and seems to support hatred and disrespect in its narrative. I love this story that the Dalai Lama told in a documentary titled The Yogis of Tibet, who witnessed the carnage and decimation of the entire Tibetan culture by the Chinese, beginning with the Communist Revolution of Mao Zedong in 1949, related a story in which he stated several times, "I was in great danger." This was surprising since these yogis cared very little about their own safety. When the enlightened yogi was asked about his perceived danger, he responded, yes, I was in grave danger. That is, I was in danger of losing my compassion for the Chinese. This is not only a beautiful story, but it also helps us remember to be careful about accepting hatred as normal in our entertainment activities, for they can put us in the same kind of danger that the enlightened yogi recognized. And even more personally significant, enjoying hatred as entertainment can keep us from reconnecting to our spirit. 3. Fear. Our universe is created out of love, kindness, peace, and well-being. So when we're an energetic match to this awareness and refuse to live in fear, we'll attract the protection and guidance we desire. We can absolutely affirm that we won't attract anything that's harmful to us or to our loved ones. We can heighten our awareness that we're never alone, and we can have faith that whatever we need to experience is on its way, and God won't send us anything we're incapable of handling. We can also be aware that the word fear is an acronym for false evidence appearing real. That one phrase can help us remember that the ego is the false self, and identifying with it leads us to believe the false evidence. Even now, after reading all of this, some readers may continue to make fear real with thoughts such as, he wouldn't be able to say these things if he knew all that I've been through. But in my heart, I know that this is a universe that's on purpose and supported by a creator who is good. I never doubt it, and not only do I refuse to live in fear, but I also refuse to attract to myself the vibrational, energetic equivalent of those fear-based thoughts. As an old German proverb proclaims, fear makes the wolf bigger than he is. And finally, 4, sarcasm. Just about every situation comedy on television has a familiar focus, dialogue that's dedicated to sarcastic, unflattering comments between the supposedly comedic characters. Put-downs are the very bread and butter of almost all primetime shows today, so in essence, we're asking to be amused by children being smart alecks toward their parents and siblings, mouthing off to each other with as many disparaging comments as possible. Oh yes, and these nasty rejoinders are followed by a laugh track to really drive home that we're being, quote, entertained, unquote. Sarcasm designed to inspire laughter sends a message to viewers that's anything but inspirational. Remember, our ultimate calling is always about being in harmony with our source of being. We're all here as the result of a creator who has great respect for all of his creations. Since no one is inferior in our Creator's eyes, no one deserves to be ridiculed for the purpose of gaining an artificial laugh, not in life or on television. When a comment is made in jest and there's a kind of clever banter taking place, that's comedy at its best. But when hostility and disrespect are uttered in almost every verbal exchange, with the express purpose to discredit and mock another person, that's a decidedly uninspiring signal being sent to the audience. Awareness and choice are ours to exercise. So if this tendency toward sarcasm has become a habit, we must begin exploring alternatives to this kind of entertainment and family interaction. You may recall that I wrote earlier in this book about my mother. Well, I simply cannot even imagine using her as the butt of a joke to demean or ridicule her. And yet I see this kind of disrespect taking place in nearly every episode of every situation comedy on the air today. Being courteous to others is a matchup to the energy of spirit. Having fun, telling jokes, and being playful with others are all part of being in spirit. But a hostile, sarcastic sense of humor is an energy that moves us away from spirit and into the realm of hurt and dishonor. On every radio, CD player, and television set, there's a wonderfully inspiring little button that says on and off, and it's your choice to befriend it. You can literally push it anytime you wish, or you can use an inner off button whenever you're bombarded by anyone or anything whose purpose is to distract you from your ultimate calling to inspiration. Don't be afraid to use the off button. It works. Chapter 13. Inspiration in Action. Quote, in our era, the road to holiness necessarily passes through the world of action. Dag Hammarskjöld. And quote, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. When we feel inspired, we're on the road to holiness that Dag Hammarskjöld refers to. Yet that road can only be paved with actions that mirror the intention of our originating spirit, actions that we're capable of choosing consciously if we're aware of the duality of giving and receiving. Like two sides of the same coin, giving and receiving are inseparable. Other examples of our duality abound. Before we can take a breath, we must give a breath. In order to give anything away, we must first have been willing to receive it. And our ability to feed others is linked to being able to accept food ourselves. Who has ever seen a person with a front but no back? How about an inside without an outside? Or a magnet with a North Pole but no South Pole? So just as the prayer of St. Francis reminds us that it is in giving that we receive, in order to receive inspiration, we must be willing to give it away, and vice versa. I'd like to present some examples of my own deliberate efforts to put the duality of inspiration in action into practice. I work at this every single day of my life. Every human encounter represents a moment of truth for me, one in which I choose to be reconnected to spirit and offer to others what I genuinely want for myself. The opportunities present themselves in the form of a smile or a greeting or an extension of kindness, even if it's just a silent blessing to a person begging on a street corner, or a prayer said quietly to myself when I hear a siren. The siren is a reminder to me to offer my thoughts of comfort to whomever is in need of assistance. These are habits that I've developed over a lifetime. Then there are the days when I go out on a premeditated odyssey of inspiration without any fanfare or need for recognition. Here's the result of one such inspiration excursion, and keep in mind this all happened in one afternoon. I reside on West Maui while I'm writing, and on this particular day I decided to make the 20-mile trek to Costco to load up with supplies for 2 weeks of uninterrupted writing. As usual, someone was standing by the roadside looking for a lift to the other side. This is a commonplace occurrence here on Maui, and it's my regular practice to pick up whoever's seeking a ride, usually a young person with a surfboard or a couple with luggage needing transportation to the airport. I always view giving rides as an opportunity to serve another person, and I get to feel good as well. If you're thinking about how dangerous this practice might be, I simply don't ever entertain such thoughts, and I never attract people or events into my life that cause me harm. It's just not my way of being in the world. On this day, I picked up a 41-year-old man from Canada named Raven. Maui tends to attract people with names like that, who needed to get to the airport. As we talked, it turned out that my passenger hadn't spoken to his father in 17 years, distancing himself out of respect for his mother and sister, who had their own unresolved conflicts with this man. Raven admitted that he felt distressed and incomplete. Moreover, he found himself repeating some of the behavioral patterns of his father that had caused this family's rift in the first place. I brought up the subject of forgiveness, mentioning this quote from A Course in Miracles. Quote, "Certain it is that all distress does not appear to be but unforgiveness." Unquote. I related the story of my experience at my own father's grave in 1974 and how that one single act of forgiveness turned my life around and headed me back in the direction of spirit. As I dropped Raven off at the airport, he hugged me. With tears in his eyes, he said, "I can't believe how much this one trip has changed my life. I feel that you were sent here by God to remove this sword that's been hanging over my head. And I know what I have to do, and I will do it, and I'll do it soon." It was a moment of inspiration for both of us. It would have been just as easy for me to maintain silence on that 20-mile ride along the ocean, but I knew that on this day, I was on a pilgrimage of inspiration, and Raven was one of my co-conspirators. I headed back to Costco for one of my favorite activities. I love the opportunity to purchase large amounts of goodies of all descriptions in the store's open warehouse atmosphere among lots of local people doing the same thing. At the back of the store on this day, a gentleman who recognized me from my PBS appearances approached me and wanted an appointment to discuss a problem he was having. I informed him that I was writing a book, so a scheduled meeting would be impossible. But knowing that some force had brought us together in the midst of all this delightful chaos, I asked, "What's the problem?" The man told me that he was a diabetic who developed a fail-safe method for delivering insulin in a manner that would leave no one out. "So, what's the problem?" I once again asked. "Why not implement your plan?" He went on to explain how he'd been unable to get the necessary government agencies to meet with him. Various layers of bureaucracy were impeding his progress. On and on he went with a litany of obstacles that he felt were being placed before him, until I finally stopped him. "I sense that you know exactly what's needed since you're a diabetic too," I said, "and you know exactly what needs to be done to implement your idea." He lit up like a Christmas tree, giving me a knowing smile, and he said, "Exactly, but I can't." I stopped him cold, reminding him that when we focus on what we don't want, then that's what we'll get. We get what we think about, whether we want it or not. I then asked him to consider staying out of the system of obstacles altogether. He should go ahead with his plan, forget about what couldn't be done, and just do it without the assistance or resistance of anyone else. If your plan is viable, then they'll ultimately come along, I reminded him. Just do it and stop trying to get the approval of a bureaucracy. And then I asked, "You know what to do and how to do it, don't you?" "Yes, I do," he replied, "and I will. I feel as if this little meeting was arranged by God just for me today." After getting my second hug from a stranger in the past 30 minutes, the man pushed his shopping cart away with a newfound sense of inspiration. He'd returned to spirit, where the idea of anything being impossible is impossible, and I'd been able to extend some spirit offerings to another. Continuing on my way back to West Maui, I picked up a young fellow named Andy, who was on his way to the Hard Rock Cafe, fancying himself a Rastafarian rap artist. Andy had long dreadlocks and a strong inclination toward using marijuana as a stimulus for his music. As it turned out, he simply wanted to approach the manager at the Hard Rock to see if he could perform there on weekends. He was out of funds and without a plan. Even his upcoming spontaneous audition had been purely a fantasy, since he hadn't contacted anyone at the restaurant for an appointment. As we talked, I told him a story that my daughter Summer had recently related to me. She has a little dog named Joey that she takes with her every day as she trains horses and gives riding lessons. Her friend Mimi had told her that Joey was a perfect example of being at peace with God, and my daughter agreed. Joey's mantra is, "Breathe in, breathe out, life is good," she said. That's all Joey does all day, every day. Breathe in, breathe out, life is good. Andy loved this story, so I asked him to give me a song using this theme as the primary lyric. My car was suddenly filled with the sounds of a Rastafarian rapper pounding out a fast-paced lyric. It was sensational, and Andy was in heaven. By the time I dropped him off at the restaurant, he had his audition all planned, and he'd written his very first song. Breathe in, breathe out, life is good. I handed Andy a $50 bill, which inspired him to cry out in appreciation, and off I drove. It was a double dose of inspiration. Andy was aligned with spirit by being a creator of his own music and feeling purposeful and confident, and I was experiencing heaven on earth for being able to extend love and assistance to another person. and it was my third such gift in the past 2 hours. Next, I proceeded to a grocery store to pick up a few items in smaller quantities than were available at Costco. As I stood in the checkout line, I struck up a conversation with the woman behind me on the subject of raspberries. I was purchasing 2 half pints of these precious little jewels to put on my morning bowl of cereal, and the lady asked about the price, which I hadn't noticed. She went on and on about how much she loved raspberries, but their cost was so outrageous she'd never spend that kind of money, even for something she loved so much. I responded by telling her about my happy memories of growing up in Michigan and picking berries as a young boy. To this day, raspberries are one of my favorite foods, and I buy them whenever they're available. The woman could relate to my memories since she grew up in Pennsylvania and used to pick the berries herself, coming home with red stains on her fingers and all around her mouth. At the register, we saw that the baskets of berries came to $7.99 each. My new friend almost collapsed, but told me to savor each and every one of those little treasures. As I walked away, I reached into my bag and I placed one of the containers in her hands and told her to enjoy them as a gift from me. This lady, who was counting out her change to pay for a single container of yogurt, was stunned. I finally convinced her that if she wouldn't accept them as a gift from me, she'd be depriving me of my own treat and knowing how much pleasure she was going to have relishing and savoring these little gems. My new friend was obviously inspired by this unexpected expression of kindness to a stranger. I could see the gratitude and love in her eyes as she tucked the berries in her straw bag. I, of course, was right on track, enjoying my 4th occurrence of inspiration in action on the same afternoon, and much to my surprise, number 5 was evolving right in front of my eyes. In almost every aisle of the grocery store, I'd seen the same woman, dressed in flowery slacks and a bright orange blouse. As I approached the bakery to buy a loaf of olive bread for my daughter Serena's arrival the following day, she loves this bread, the woman in the colorful outfit talked to me about a multi-grain bread that she absolutely loved. "It's the best I've ever tasted," she said in a heavy foreign accent. As I approached the cashier, there she was again ahead of me, asking if I'd hold her place while she picked up some items she'd forgotten. Then in the parking lot, she stopped her car to allow me to enter the exit ramp. Finally, as I was driving home, I spotted her again. Her car was sitting by the side of a putting green with the door open and the engine running, and she and a man were hitting golf balls on the green. To me, this was more than a series of accidental encounters, so I decided to turn my car around and deliver a present to her. I pulled up behind the automobile and approached with an autographed copy of The Power of Intention in my hand. It turned out that this lady was originally from Poland and was on her honeymoon. She introduced me to her husband, and I gave them the surprise wedding present, for which they were most grateful. I have no idea what took place in their lives after I drove off. I can't tell you why she kept appearing over and over and over again, or if the book I gave them made any kind of a difference in their lives. All I can say for certain is that these newlyweds were very touched by my gesture, and I had my 5th gift of feeling connected to spirit in one afternoon. As you can see, the opportunities to reach into the lives of others in an inspiring way arise in countless ways every single day. We can either act on these momentary impulses and feel inspired, or we can ignore them and stay in our ego-dominated world. I choose to act, for it makes me feel creatively alive, connected to God, and to everyone else in the world. Taking action is how we increase our connectedness to spirit. If we're heeding our ultimate calling, we must be willing to act on that mission. We may believe that inspiration is something that arrives in some mysterious way that's beyond our control, or perhaps we're waiting for God to send us motivational signs. But it's clearly best to rely exclusively on our decision to act in ways that will intensify our awareness of spirit. Try this action plan for a few weeks and see if you don't feel more inspired than you've ever felt before. Part 4. Conversing with your spiritual source. Chapter 14. Your spiritual source can only be what it is. I cannot imagine a God who rewards and punishes the objects of his creation, whose purposes are modeled after our own, a God, in short, who but is a reflection of human frailty. Albert Einstein. And from Emanuel Swedenborg, we are because God is. 5 characteristics of God. Let's now examine the elements that most of us agree define the essence of our Creator, along with how they can help us sensibly approach Him. 1. God is love. We came from love, and we desire to return to that heaven while still on earth. I repeat Emerson's appropriate observation that love is our highest word and the synonym for God. In other words, if we dwell in love, we dwell in God. If God is love and cannot be anything other than what God is, and we wish to have a dialogue with God, then it seems to me that we come to our source in love or we're wasting our time. God cannot and will not respond to unloving requests. No matter what our religion, whatever we want to discourse with our source of being, we must do so without malice or hatred in our heart. In this way, we'll shift our vibrational energy to a frequency that harmonizes with the highest vibration in the universe, which, of course, is that of spirit. As St. Francis instructs us so simply, where there is hatred, let us sow love. Love and forgiveness will then activate the dormant forces I talked about in the opening parts of this program. That is, the right people and the events will materialize synchronistically. This is because we're in spirit, remembering that God simply can't help if we expect him to hear anything other than love and forgiveness. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. This seems to say it all. So in the private, quiet, prayerful moments of asking for God's help, don't ask him to help defeat others in any way. Rather, pray, Dear God, make me an instrument of thy love. I want to be like you. I have forgiven them, and I have forgiven myself. And remember that there can be no forgiveness without love. And without love, there can be no way of being heard by our source. 2. God is peace. One of the most quoted verses in the Old Testament, which may also be my favorite biblical offering, is this: be still and know that I am God. So a corollary of this might then be agitated and turbulent, and you will never know God. Along with praying or communing with our source with peace in our heart, we must be still. This means taking time to get quiet before meditating, and also monitoring our breathing. As we exhale, we can train ourselves to let go of all of our non-peaceful thoughts, and as we inhale, we can breathe in spirit. We can also ask St. Francis to guide us. He had very little peace in his lifetime, but when he prayed, he knew what his source was like. St. Francis wanted to be in spirit. So rather than asking God to deliver him some peace so that he could escape the disorder and the chaos he saw all around him, he requested, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. In other words, St. Francis knew that God was peace. So in his prayer, he asked to be returned to a state where he'd be like his Creator. We can keep reminding ourselves that all of the non-peace that's in the world is not of God. It's of ego. Then we can ask to be helped back to his peace. This approach will attract the assistance we're requesting. It's all about matching up the vibrational energy of our desire for peace with thoughts and behaviors that are consistently peaceful with those desires. 3. God is all-inclusive. We won't be heard by or receive assistance from our source if we're touting our separateness from our fellow humans. You see, when we seek special individual favors from God, or even when we seek to converse with our source from this perspective, we're once again living an illusion. If God were to acknowledge our belief in separation, perfect oneness wouldn't and couldn't exist. It's impossible for a source that creates everyone, and therefore is in everyone, to even have a dialogue with someone who's harboring ideas of their specialness or separation from everyone else. In conversing with our source, as always, we strive to be more like it. So we need to see ourselves as connected to everyone in the universe as we enter into prayer. Then we can ask for guidance and assistance in summoning the all-inclusive spirit. Make me an instrument of you. Allow me to see you in everyone I encounter. Help me to see myself in others and to extend first to them what I aspire to myself. I've noticed that this is how you are, and I wish to be just like you. This is the kind of dialogue that activates the dormant forces I've spoken about. The key is getting past your ego-based idea of separation and instead seeing yourself as a part of the oneness of all. As Thomas Aquinas put it so succinctly, true peace consists in not separating ourselves from the will of God. 4. God is abundance. As St. Paul once said, God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance. So why is there so much apparent shortage in the world, including people starving and living in poverty, and millions of folks having the persistent problem of too much month left at the end of the money? Well, what I can say for certain is that God is not to blame. There's more than enough to go around. After all, we came from a place that knows nothing of deprivation, and we arrived on a planet that has the capacity to grow the food and slake the thirst of every one of its inhabitants many times over. As a species, we human beings have brought the ideas of deficiency and depletions of God's gifts on ourselves, largely by taking very ungodlike actions. God serves all of us, but our greed has made us forget others and focus only on ourselves. As a people and as individuals, we've brought lack to our lives, and we can only fix this deficiency by becoming more like our always serving, endlessly abundant spiritual source. The answers to the resolution of poverty and scarcity are readily available to us, and they'd be resolved tomorrow if we remembered that we're all one on this planet. We all share the same origins, and we all end up back in the same non-place where we began. When we return to spirit in our heart, our governments will align with this truth, and our leaders will emerge from in-spirit consciousness. We need to pray for the elimination of a perceived shortage and approach God in the style of St. Francis with words that go something like, "Make me an instrument of thy endless abundance," rather than asking God to fulfill something that's missing. In this way, we can summon his energy back to us, rather than staying focused on what we don't have. If we focus our thoughts on lack, we'll only attract more of the same. And 5, God is well-being. Spirit never has a fever and knows nothing of illness. So in my humble opinion, it makes no sense to pray or engage in a discourse with God from a perspective of asking to be healed, unless, that is, we have a firm understanding of what we mean by the word heal. If we mean to overcome an illness or infirmity, then I feel that we're again violating the truism that nothing can be what it isn't, including God. As Ernest Holmes once wrote, "The will of God is always good," which means to me that disease, sickness, and suffering are not part of God's energy. On the other hand, if we use the word heal to mean reconnecting to our source of well-being, then we're open to the potential of receiving assistance to overcome any infirmity. And that's how I use the word. I never asked God to help me to get over a feeling of sickness. Even when I had a minor heart attack 5 years ago, I asked to be made an instrument of God's well-being. I acknowledged that my body had taken on non-well-being, be it from my lifestyle, diet, and habits, or the toxins I breathe in and out, whatever. It was not of God, it was of me in this physical world, and I prayed to be reunited to a stream of well-being. I knew that I was a piece of God, and it was just as easy for him to heal a cut on my finger as it was to restore my heart to a healthy state. Since I knew that God's healing power was within me, I just needed to help my body remember this. Similarly, in a time of recent disharmony in my life, I found myself feeling sick to my stomach and unable to sleep, until I remembered that this experience was a gift to me. As I conversed with my higher power, I asked for guidance and visualized myself as a magnet attracting plentiful well-being, and in this way healing was virtually immediate. Before we go on to the next chapter, let's look back to the observation made by Emanuel Swedenborg. We are because God is, and add, not because of what God isn't. Chapter 15. Your spiritual source knows. Quote, "It is true that divine will prevails at all times and under all circumstances. There is no need to tell God your requirements. He knows them himself and will look after them." Ramana Maharshi. And from Ernest Holmes, "The thing we surrender to becomes our power." As the parent of 8 children, it goes without saying that I've witnessed many occasions when a 2-year-old made a request that couldn't be accommodated. Often the request became a standoff, with the toddler crying, insisting, and even throwing a tantrum. But since I was the adult, I'd stand firm and refuse to grant the child's wishes. Running around the block unsupervised, racing through the house with a sucker sticking out of his or her mouth, playing with electrical sockets, climbing up the stairs alone, and putting his or her finger in a younger sibling's eyes were some of the behaviors forbidden by me, the parent, who simply knew better. If we put ourselves in the place of toddlers and give our Creator the very same leeway that we as parents took with our children, the purpose of this metaphor becomes perfectly clear. Just as it's absurd for a 2-year-old to insist on having his or her way, our creative spirit doesn't need to be reminded of what to do for us or how to go about doing it. It already knows. In fact, there's a wonderfully enlightening quote in the Bhagavad Gita that says, Only the fool, whose mind is deluded by egotism, considers himself to be the doer. When we're about to enter into a discourse with our Creator, it's crucial to approach with the understanding that we aren't the doer. It may sound a bit extreme, but this is how Immanuel Kant described our situation. God is our owner. We are His property. His providence works for our good. Please don't take the word owner as an insult. It's only the ego that's offended by this concept. In other words, we needn't presume to tell our source what needs to be done to provide us with a happy, fulfilling life. Instead, it's our job to change our thinking so that it's vibrating to a frequency that matches God's energy. And this begins by understanding that it's impossible for God to forget anything. Unlike human parents, God is omnipotent, so it's unnecessary to remind Him of our needs. Trusting and surrendering. Returning to the analogy at the beginning of this chapter, most children are free-spirited little beings who don't think about questioning their parents' judgment. After all, most mothers and fathers know what's in their offspring's best interest, including what's required for successful survival. These senior partners look out for their kids' needs and direct their early life activities, and they do this as long as is necessary, which is usually until their children begin to develop the ability to trust their own instincts and apply what they've learned. As adults, we can look back on our earliest days with a strong sense of appreciation. We learned not to play in traffic, to avoid eating poisonous foods, to get enough rest each day, and so on. Today, we feel thankful and appreciative that our parents were there to guide us toward the responsible, self-contained people we are today. We can appreciate that they did what was best for us, and they never forgot us. I trust that the analogy is clear. Our relationship with God, our all-knowing, never-forgetting senior partner, is just like our childhood relationship with our parents. Just as we did with our mothers and fathers, we're now choosing to trust in the wisdom of our Creator. In other words, we don't need to be told by virtual parents what's best for us. We don't have to rely on so-called religious superiors to keep us in line because we're no longer needy little infants. We now trust our source because we've matured to a point where doubt has been supplanted by faith. Somewhere between childhood and maturity, we surrendered and trusted our parents just as we're now surrendering and trusting the all-knowing, loving source of creation. Co-creating with Spirit. Keep in mind that we can't co-create with anyone, including our spiritual source, unless we're in a place of harmony. To that end, we must suspend our false self, the ego, and stop all thoughts of resistance before we can participate in creating the inspired life we desire, in perfect symmetry with Spirit. Whatever we ask of our source in our prayerful communion will no longer be a wish or a hope. It will become a reality in our mind, just as it is in the mind of God. The how and when of its arrival, which have always troubled ego, are no longer issues. We maintain our optimism in thoughts such as, I desire it, it's in harmony with my source, or it's on its way, there's nothing to fuss about, and then we can relax and surrender to our knowing. Again, as Ernest Holmes reminds us, the thing we surrender to becomes our power. I know that the term surrender is generally associated with defeat, but there's no victor or victim when surrendering to God. This isn't about winning or losing. You see, what we're doing here is giving up our false self in favor of returning to our authentic self. And when we do, we'll meet our spiritual Creator and become empowered to live in the same vibration with it. We'll become co-creators by surrendering and joining the all-knowing, all-creating force that allows everything to come into existence. Then our knowing replaces our doubts, and divine will prevails at all times. Only now, we're in harmony with that divine will. Chapter 16. It's all about remembering. Quote from A Course in Miracles. The memory of God comes to the quiet mind. It cannot come where there is conflict. For a mind at war against itself remembers not eternal gentleness. What you remember is a part of you, for you must be as God created you. Let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God, still shining in your quiet mind. Everything we've ever experienced is still stored as an invisible memory, and we can access it if we choose. For example, when my grandmother was close to death and doing what some call involuntary hallucinating, she was pulling out all kinds of facts from her earliest days. Street addresses, the names of neighbors, locations of family outings, relationships with friends of her own mother, who were only there in my grandmother's infancy. All of it was somehow available to her. It turned out that in some mysterious way, Grandma was tapping into memories that everyone else thought couldn't possibly be recalled because she was only a baby at the time. I have no idea how she did this. All I know for certain is that we reach into our own personal history and bring to the present thoughts that impact our state of mind as well as our level of inspiration. You see, the mere recollection of something in the past that we call a memory is capable of affecting us either positively or negatively in the present moment. Therefore, they're extremely powerful tools for our current state of mind. Obviously, there are some negative memories lurking around somewhere in the nethermost regions of our mind, but why access them if they're going to cause us to feel uninspired? What I'm trying to make clear here is that we've got to figure out how to return to where we came from in order to commune with our spiritual creator. Therefore, being inspired itself is going to require us to go back and do some major remembering. Remembering your spirit. At the beginning of this chapter, there's a powerful quotation from A Course in Miracles that I feel sums up all we need to know to facilitate going all the way back, that is, prior to our baby days, our birth, and even our conception. It's about remembering our origination. I committed this passage to memory many years ago, and I use it as a way to remember who I truly am and where I really came from, particularly when I communicate with my Creator, to stay on purpose and in spirit. Now I'd like to go through each of the messages in this observation from A Course in Miracles one by one. Number 1, the memory of God comes to the quiet mind. We came from a quiet, peaceful place. That's the very essence of creation. So when our mind is filled with noisy dialogue, we shut out the possibility of remembering our spirit. Incessant chatter keeps us attached to the physical world and produces anxiety, stress, fear, worry, and so many of the emotional reactions that are decidedly removed from God realization. We must minimize distractions when we wish to communicate with God. So being in nature, away from the artificial noises that invade our space, is helpful. But the most important thing to consider is how to keep our mind free from the dizzying, bewildering cascade of thoughts flowing through our head from morning till night, and even on into our dream state. It's been estimated that we have something like 60,000 separate thoughts every day. The real problem is that we have the same 60,000 thoughts today that we had yesterday. I've made the practice of meditation a part of my daily life because it's one way to quiet the mind so that the memory of God is accessible. So by learning to meditate, or at the very least shutting down the inner dialogue produced, directed, and acted upon by your ego, you can open up a space for remembering and returning to spirit. 2, it cannot come where there is conflict. In order for conflict to exist, there must be two opposing forces at work. That is, one force, in the form of an idea, a point of view, a desire, or a contribution, directly clashes with another. Conflict defines our lives in many ways, as we oppose our partners, our children, our bosses, our neighbors, and even our countries. In politics, it's always one party versus the other. And the entertainment industry portrays battling points of view that are usually turned into violent scenes. Essentially, conflict requires two-ness. However, remembering where we came from involves our returning to the oneness of being in spirit. After all, there are no battling powers in the divine realm of spirit. There's only perfect oneness, and this is what we want to rejoin. We want to become one again with our Creator, and we can't retrieve this memory of God with a mind in conflict in any way. 3, for a mind at war against itself remembers not eternal gentleness. The second part of this teaching from A Course in Miracles reinforces that a combative mind cannot remember where it once resided in eternal gentleness. Obviously, you can't wage war and simultaneously focus on peace and gentleness, and it is eternal gentleness that you want to remember and rejoin. It's really quite simple to do this. Just close down the battlefield and surrender. Remove all of the artillery, send the soldiers home, and replace the instruments of war in your mind with thoughts of peace, tranquility, and surrender. Making your mind a place of peace is achieved by your own will, so steadfastly refusing to have thoughts of conflict allows you to activate the glory of remembering your spirit. 4, the fourth part of this quote. What you remember is a part of you. Every memory I have is me. What a glorious feeling it is to know this. We each have the power to retrieve any piece of ourselves that we desire and to experience it right here, right now, in this present moment. The great Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard once observed that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. In other words, if we can't go back and remember the spiritual bliss that defined us before the beginning, we've really abandoned a part of ourselves. As we move into communion with God, we must know that our inability to remember our spiritual origins is another way of really saying, quote, I'm unable to know myself because I have no recollection or memory of my spirit, unquote. In fact, the corollary of this line from A Course in Miracles that we're processing right now would be, what you don't remember is not a part of you. In other words, if we fail to remember spirit, then obviously it isn't a part of us. And 5, for you must be as God created you. As you communicate with your source of being, know that you're awakening a part of yourself that's just like God. In fact, you ought to try to approach communication with God by being as closely aligned to the way that you were created as possible. That is, by becoming a vibrational match to the all-loving Creator. Come to the quiet moments in consultation with God in love, in peace, and without judgment. As A Course in Miracles is saying, you must be as you were created. So why put on a false mask and pretend to be anything or anyone else? In this way, you can open the channel of communication because you finally remembered to be the way you were created. And that's the key to effective prayer. And as Gandhi once said, prayer is not an old woman's idle amusement. Properly understood and applied, it's the most potent instrument of action. And 6, let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God still shining in your quiet mind. Let's take the 3 suggestions in this teaching one at a time. First, A Course says, let this madness be undone. The madness here is that of living in a state of conflict. In other words, we must make an attempt to transcend the dichotomies of our life because the division creates so much suffering and keeps us from living an inspired life. I remember a Ram Dass lecture in which he said, I firmly come to the conclusion that there are no thems for me anymore. I can't be told who to hate, who to fight, who to subdue. I only see an us in my heart. All those messages to divvy up our world are insane. All our self-centeredness just drives our ego's insatiable appetite for making us special and putting other people down. All our inclinations towards violence, even when it's acceptable, such as supporting war in the name of patriotism or endorsing hatred in the name of doing our duty, are wrong. The Course encourages us to be done with this madness once and for all, both in our minds and in our actions. And second, we're told to turn in peace to the remembrance of God. Once again, we know in our heart that we came from a place of peace. So any discord can't be the result of our Creator's actions. God cannot come to us when we pray from non-peace, so the solution is to return to the remembrance of Him and ask to be made an instrument of His peace. When I find myself out of sorts, I remember. And what I remember is to turn to peace right now in prayer. I become peace rather than anguish, and I feel the calmness I long for come over me like a wave of pleasurable relief. We always have the power within us to shift into a peaceful mode. And when we respect someone, we're able to be in peace in their presence by suspending our inclination to be arrogant. For example, I recall watching John McEnroe behave in boorish ways on the tennis court, slamming his racket, hurling profanities at the referees, and generally being in a very non-peaceful state. But he never behaved this way when he played his rival, Bjorn Borg. Amazingly, McEnroe was almost always able to control his outbursts of negativity whenever he played this cool, easygoing, nonviolent, brilliant tennis player. Because he respected Borg so much, McEnroe came to his presence in peace. Finally, the Course reminds us that this peaceful remembrance is still shining in our quiet mind. Notice the words still and quiet. Regardless of where we are in life, if we're breathing, we're connected to our source of being. Even though the connection might have gotten a bit corroded, we still have the remembrance of God shining inside of us. It can't be otherwise. Our job is to access those memories, and it will help if we keep them in our quiet mind. This remembrance doesn't shine in our ego mind, our noisy mind, in our self-important mind. Rather, it shines in a quiet, nonviolent, peaceful, loving mind. When we go to the quietness, that shining is a luminous reminder of how to approach our creative spirit by remembering. You don't have to learn a single new thing in order to communicate and make conscious contact with your source. It's all in you already. All you have to do is remember. Chapter 17, The Language of Spirit. Quote from Satya Sai Baba. When asked where God is, people point towards the sky or some far and distant region. No wonder, then, that he does not manifest himself. Realize that he is in you, with you, behind you, and all around you, and he can be seen and felt everywhere. Unquote. In the previous 3 chapters, I've tried to stress that it's our job to take responsibility for opening the channel to communication to God, rather than viewing him as a cosmic bellboy whose job it is to listen to our whims and respond just because we ask. But how can we recognize when our spiritual source is getting in touch with us? As Jesus said in one of my favorite quotes, which I've shared thousands of times in my life, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Matthew 19:26. I'd like you to listen to the ideas I'm offering here concerning the language of spirit with this quote in mind. As weird as some of the communication patterns I talk about may seem, and as much as your ego may be tempted to dismiss them as mere coincidence and devoid of meaning, remember that, with God, all things are possible. Being ready for the teacher. It's been known for millennia that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, our teachers are always there because they're gifts from Spirit. The real question is our readiness to tune in to what they have to teach us. The key word here is readiness. That is, we must be open to all possibilities and trusting in our intuitive hunches. Wondering if something might possibly be a message from God is evidence that we're open to our intuition. Our thoughts are sacred and substantiate our connection to the divine, so they don't need to be corroborated by anyone or anything else. Our Creator is listening and responding in ways that don't necessarily correspond to the laws of the material world. That is, we won't be hearing from a physical source that's aligned with cause and effect, the laws of physics, or even what we believe is possible. It's our job to do all that we can to vibrationally match to that spiritual energy. We were once perfectly together with our creative force, and now we're being called to come back to it. It's vitally important to be open to the language of alignment. Most of us need to begin the process by recognizing our tendency to discount such messages as mere happenstance. In an infinite universe with an organized intelligence supporting it at all moments, there can be no such thing as accidents. For the rest of this chapter, I'll be offering some of my own hunches about how the all-knowing creative spirit communicates. Some of these ways fall into the category of inexplicable alignments, which means that there's meaning there, but our ego mind, chained as it is to its belief in the material laws it has always lived by, refuses to see the hidden meaning that's staring us right in the face. The 4 messages of alignment. For many years, I've felt what I considered to be the language of spirit speaking to me in ways that often defy my logical mind. These feelings are more than hunches and even go beyond intuition, and I sincerely believe that they've contributed to my living an inspired life. The following 4 examples aren't rules or laws that apply to everyone, but if they do work for others, I'll be even more inspired because it's my intention to be in a space where I'm able to give to others all that I know. I also offer these ideas with a constant reminder that when one listens to Spirit, all things are possible. And even though I'm offering them in a numbered sequence, they certainly don't conform to any linear arrangement. 1. Alignment of feelings. When I feel good, or God, I'm aligned with Spirit. As I tell my children, we must rely on how we feel to determine our state of health, rather than seeking our answers in a medical printout full of numbers. Feeling energized, content, excited, and happy are better indicators of our health and well-being than having our bodily functions assessed by a distant laboratory. A positive, honest response to the question, does this or will this make me feel good, tells us immediately if we're aligned with our creative source or not. 2. Alignments with nature. Everything in nature is in spirit. It isn't spoiled by ego, nor can it ever be. So when nature speaks to us, we should listen intently. When a wild bird touches us, for instance, or a fish brushes by when we're swimming in the ocean or a lake, I believe that it's a direct communication from our source of being. Since these creations of God instinctively keep their distance, when they depart from their DNA patterns to actually contact us physically, I think we should pay attention. So be aware of episodes in nature that arouse spirit and kindle an inner spark of awe and admiration for you. You don't have to discuss it with another being. If it has meaning for you, it's valid. Listen to the winds, the critters, the clouds, the rains, and the oceans. Listen to it all. Indeed, nature has much to teach us, and it will help show the way. All we need to do is align with its perfection and note how it aligns with ours. 3. Alignment with events. Strange occurrences and seemingly inexplicable events may actually be our all-creating source lining up coincidences, in quotes, to teach us and show us the way. The reason we begin to notice all this type of aligned synchronicity is because we've tuned into it. The teachers have always been there, but now we notice them. And our noticing indicates a new level of readiness to listen to our ultimate calling. In fact, these alignments can take some really interesting forms. The same numbers showing up, for example. We awake precisely at 4:44 morning after morning and then see those numbers appear on the odometer, on the radio, as a checkbook balance, at the deli counter, and as an assigned number for a charity walk, causes us to ask, what's going on here? The answer is that the universe is using us to be receptive and pay attention. It's not about playing all fours in a casino or the lottery. It's about knowing that these seemingly accidental repetitions are actually invitations from Spirit to join it. When a book literally falls into our lap or is sent to us by several different people, or even when we keep seeing the title and having it referred to us by others over and over, we need to notice, stop our resistance, and surrender. When we end up reading the contents and applying what it offers, we're aligning ourselves and becoming a vibrational match to the same source that's sending us these signals. And 4, alignments with people. When people line up with our thoughts and mysteriously connect their physical presence with our private inner meanderings, we should take note. We must tell ourselves, Spirit is aligning my thoughts with events that are happening. I'll stay alert to what I'm being offered here because there may be a reason. That's all. Just be cognizant of what might be happening, and by being open to what may be baffling and perhaps indecipherable, we're likely to discover that we're being guided to learn. A few weeks ago, I was reading through a book I'd written 16 years ago. In it, I mentioned a friend, Erlene Rintz, whom I'd attended school with from 4th grade through high school. I put the book down and went jogging, yet Erlene was still on my mind. I thought, I'm going to call her the next time I'm in Detroit. After all, we're both having our 65th birthdays this year. That very evening, I was scheduled to receive the Martin Luther King Mahatma Gandhi Peace Award from the Unity Church of Maui, which would be attended by approximately 1,000 people. As I completed my speech and walked to the lobby to sign autographs, I saw the little girl who sat next to me in grade school and who was my first love and who occupied my thoughts throughout my school years. Believe it or not, as I was thinking of her more than a half-century later, Erlene was thousands of miles from home and hugging me in the lobby of a theater in Lahaina, Maui. It turns out that she was visiting Maui, had seen the award announcement in the newspaper, and had come to the auditorium to surprise me. It was one of those synchronistic alignments of spirit at work. Somehow, at an unconscious level, I was already reconnecting to Erlene without being aware that she was even in the area. Noticing the same folks showing up in different settings, running into people we haven't seen in a while after we've just heard their names mentioned, and repeatedly seeing an individual's name in magazines, on television, or in a local bookstore, are all synchronistic alignments. Spirit is lining up these sequential happenings for a reason. We just need to be open to learning the reason, and it most likely will be revealed. Perhaps it will be a dream or a sudden instant of eureka, or maybe it will become clearer when simply allowed. No matter how the message comes, we'll look back on it with a renewed insight and the benefit of no longer being closed-minded about such possibilities. What I know for certain within my very core is that there's no separation between us and all that we encounter in the universe. One of my favorite poets is William Butler Yeats, and here he perfectly sums up the ideas in this chapter. O chestnut tree, great-rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? O body swayed to music, O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance? You are the dancer and the dance, just as God is. In other words, those messages from Spirit are you if you feel them, because it's impossible to separate the dance from the dancer, the root from the blossom, and you from God. The only place where separation takes place is in your mind, but since you're now heeding your ultimate calling, you're right on your way to living an inspired life. Part 5. A personal look at inspiration. Quote from A Course in Miracles. There is a way of living in the world that is not here, although it seems to be. You do not change appearance, though you smile more frequently. Your forehead is serene. Your eyes are quiet. You walk this path as others walk, nor do you seem to be distinct from them, although you are indeed. Thus can you serve them while you serve yourself." Unquote. Chapter 18. How Life Looks When I'm Inspired. Quote, "Give me a man who sings at his work," unquote, from Thomas Carlyle. And from Virgil, "They can because they think they can." In this final chapter, I offer my own very personal view on how the world looks when I feel inspired. I'd like to acknowledge right from the outset that I don't live at this level of being in spirit 100% of the time. Like most everyone else, I occasionally have lapses and feel uninspired. Yet these moments have become rarer and rarer. In fact, it's difficult for me to recall a day in the past several years when I felt completely uninspired. What follows is a personal account of how I feel inside and what seems to take place in the world around me when I feel connected to spirit beyond what I can share here in this program. The story of Jack. The same day that I completed Chapter 17 and read it over the telephone to my editor, Joanna Pyle, on Bainbridge Island, Washington, I had the most profoundly mystical experience of being in spirit in all of my 65 years. The photograph on the cover of this program is a recreation of what happened. When I finished up with Joanna, I went for my daily hour-long walk along the beach. But for some reason, I elected to take a slightly different route along a grassy area adjacent to the beach. I was recalling my friend Jack Boland, a Unity minister in Detroit, who crossed over about a decade ago. Jack loved monarch butterflies, often telling stories of how he marveled at these paper-thin creatures who migrated thousands of miles in high winds and returned to the same branch on the same tree where they first emerged from their cocoons. Before Jack passed away, I presented him with a beautiful paperweight containing a dead monarch that I had found in perfect condition. When he died, his wife returned it to me, telling me how much Jack loved that gift and how much he admired these amazing creatures who had such mysterious intelligence built into their brains, which are the size of a pinhead. Jack always told me to be in a state of gratitude, and he ended every sermon with this message to God: "Thank you, thank you, thank you." On 3 occasions since his death, the monarch butterfly has landed on my body. Since these creatures studiously avoid human contact, each time this has happened, I've thought of Jack and thought, "Thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you." Anyway, as I walked, feeling grateful for having completed the second-to-last chapter of the book, a monarch landed on the ground 3 feet in front of me. I said Jack's magic words to myself, "Thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you," and felt deep appreciation for my life and the beauty of the day. The butterfly stayed right there until I approached it. Then it flapped its wings several times and flew away. Thinking of Jack and feeling a little bewildered and immensely thankful, I watched this creature in flight now 40 or 50 yards away. As God is my witness, the butterfly made a U-turn and not only headed in my direction, but landed right smack on my finger. Needless to say, I was shocked, but not totally surprised. I must confess that it seems to me that the more I stay in spirit, the more I experience synchronicities similar to this one. But what followed did border on the incredulous, even for me. This little creature became my constant companion for the next 2.5 hours. He sat first on one hand and then moved to my other hand, never even coming close to flying away. He seemed to be trying to communicate with me by moving his wings back and forth and even opening and closing his tiny mouth as if attempting to speak. And as crazy as it may sound, I felt a deep affinity to this precious living being. I sat on the ground and simply stayed with my new fragile friend for 30 or so minutes. Then I called Joanna from my cell phone, and she was also stunned by the synchronicity, insisting that I somehow get a picture of this event. At this point, I decided to return to my home approximately a mile from where I was sitting with my new companion. I returned along the beach walk where the winds were brisk. The butterfly's wings were pushed by these high gusts, but he clung to my finger and even moved to another hand without making any effort to leave. As I walked, I encountered a 4-year-old girl with her mother. The girl was sobbing over some perceived tragedy in her young life, and when I showed her my pet butterfly, her expression went from sad to blissful in one split second. She smiled from ear to ear and asked me all about the winged creature on my forefinger. When I got home, I was talking on my cell phone to my friend, Reed Tracy, as I walked upstairs. He laughed with me as I related the bizarre synchronicity at play at this very moment. I said, "Reed, it's been 90 minutes, and this little guy has adopted me." Reed also encouraged me to get a photograph of this, since it was obviously in complete harmony with what I was writing. I left my new friend, whom I now call Jack, sitting on the handwritten Chapter 17 on my lanai, and went downstairs. I found Cindy, a young woman who works nearby, and asked her to run to the store and purchase a disposable camera. She did, and I went back to the patio, put my hand next to Jack, and watched him jump right onto my finger. The photo on the cover of this program is a recreation of that magical moment, and it's the exact butterfly as well. It appeared that my butterfly companion had decided that he was now going to live with me forever. After another hour or so of meditating and communing with this little creature of God, and pondering this event as the most unprecedented and out-of-the-ordinary spiritual experience or episode I'd ever encountered, I gently placed Jack back on my manuscript while I proceeded to take a long, hot shower. When I returned to the patio, I placed my finger near my winged friend, and as I'd done many times in the previous 150 minutes, but he now seemed like a totally different little critter. He fluttered away, landing on a table, flapped his wings twice, and flew off straight upward toward the heavens. Moments with him were now history, but I still had the photographs, which I treasure. The next morning, I decided to watch one of my favorite films, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, which I hadn't viewed for more than a decade. And sure enough, in the opening scenes of Franco Zeffirelli's interpretation of the life of St. Francis, there he was, with a butterfly alighting on his fingers. Inspirational vibrations. When I live my life so as to be open to the language of spirit, I find almost overwhelming rapture overtaking me. For several days after my experience with Jack, people kept telling me that I seemed so peaceful and content, and one woman even suggested that I was walking grace. This episode with my butterfly friend and the communiques from spirit touched me at an unprecedented level. From the perspective of being in spirit, I've seen its hands embrace me and heard it say, "You are not alone. You can count on me to guide you, and whatever you do not doubt my presence." This makes me feel safe, comforted, and that I'm not alone. I feel good. I feel God, because I'm living in almost perfect harmony with the source of my being, living on purpose and writing from my heart. The reason I feel inspired isn't because the world looks perfect. Rather, it's the other way around. The reason the world looks perfect to me is because I'm in spirit, a person who chooses to live an inspired life. I'm able to stay in a state of gratitude from the moment I awake early in the morning right up until I close my eyes while falling asleep. And throughout each day, I'm reminded that staying in spirit is really about staying in vibrational harmony. I don't find it necessary to change anyone or anything that I encounter or read about in my daily life. Each time that I'm tempted to, I catch myself and return to a mindset that calls to me to be more like God, right here and right now. I stay inspired by making an energetic shift within myself. When I do, the world looks completely different, and I move inwardly toward peace and kindness. The energetic shift is merely a way of processing people and events from the insight of being unified with the all-creating source. That is, by eschewing judgment and allowing the world to be as it is rather than as I think it should be. I stay inspired by encouraging others to live out their destiny and allowing the world to unfold as it will, and I'm much more likely to feel peaceful. In fact, when I'm living my life from this perspective of inspiration, my vibrational energy is more attuned to that of the creative energy of the universe, and I find that my effect on others is far more spiritually aligned. Furthermore, I know within my own being that I'm doing something very powerful to make this world a more spiritually oriented place for us all. You see, when I resonate to anger, shame, hatred, or revenge, I add to these decidedly non-spiritual energies by joining in what I find to be so objectionable. But when I remember to bring non-judgment, love, tolerance, and compassion to these low, ego-dominated energies, I see how different the world looks, and even how different those around me act in the presence of these God-realized energies. I feel optimistic when I'm in spirit, with an inner knowing that nothing can interfere with an idea whose time is coming or has already arrived. I trust that our Creator knows what it's doing and that good triumphs over what ego believes is bad or evil. I sense that we're all moving toward a world that will no longer know the horrors of war or practice our long-established habits of inhumanity toward our brothers and sisters around the globe, who may have different cultural views and their own unique physical distinctiveness. By staying in spirit, I'm truly inspired to see the potential for greatness that's in all of us, as one people, and I turn from anguish to faith that at least I can live from a place of God realization and practice being a force for good or for God. Staying in vibrational alignment with Spirit allows me to be more present in all of my life activities. I find myself less concerned with goals, outcomes, winning, and accumulations, and far more involved in the process of enjoying the activities of my life. Arriving seems to replace striving, and being in a state of flow is far more common than my old, uninspired state of worry and anguish. I remind myself that Spirit is only here and now, not yesterday, not tomorrow, only now. By keeping my vibration aligned spiritually, I see the ecstasy in the present. Everything else that once was a source of worry doesn't come up for me, since the outcomes are already handled for me in my own mind. What will be, I remind myself. The world looks so much more peaceful when I approach it this way, and my ego, which once needed to win at all costs, is relegated to a distant seat in a stadium in another galaxy. Choosing inspiration. My experience with Jack, as well as many similar kinds of episodes in my life, taught me that the laws of the material world truly do not apply in the presence of God realization. And I know that I have the choice to live at this level of inspiration. When I do so, it seems that the world changes. Animals behave differently than their biological genetics would seem to allow. People at a distance seem to hear me telepathically and respond to my highest thoughts. Objects seem to materialize in defiance of what scientists say is possible. And healing takes place in spite of modern medicine saying otherwise. In other words, miracles seem to be ordinary. The world looks like a place where everything is possible, where restrictions and limitations are non-existent, and where the power of our Creator seems to roll right up and land at my feet, begging me to hop on board and witness the infinite possibilities it offers. This is how I feel when I align myself to Spirit, cocky inside because I know something that so few ever come to realize, but humble and awestruck on the outside at the miraculousness of it all. When I remember to stay in Spirit, I've realized that when one thing appears to be going wrong, I can see clearly that 10 things are going right. For example, if my cell phone isn't working, I can note that my health is fine, my family is safe, the ocean is calm for swimming, my bank account has a surplus, my electricity is fully functional, and so on, and on it goes. From a perspective of being in Spirit, I automatically shift my attention away from what's going wrong and onto what's right. This then becomes my point of attraction, and I attract more of what I'm focused on, whereas at an earlier time in my life, I'd attract more of what was going wrong because that was my point of attraction. How sublimely beautiful the world now looks to me from this magnificent place of inspiration. No longer do I stay focused on and attract more of what's going wrong, for I've learned to place my attention on what's right, what's working, and what's aligned with the all-creating Spirit. From this place of inspiration, I ask, what if I looked deep within myself and found no original sin at all? That is, what if I discovered original innocence instead? What if the same were true for everyone? I know that our creative source is one of good, and I also know that we must be like what we came from. Therefore, everyone, including myself, is a piece of God. We came to this world from innocence and love, not from a place of sin or weakness. When I see Christ consciousness in everyone, even those with whom I differ greatly, I'm able to feel good, to feel God. When I know that there's no original sin in anyone, I'm able to think like Mother Teresa, who told the world, in each person I see the face of Christ in one of his most distressing disguises. When it is goodness that I look for, rather than sin and weakness, that's what I see. I then see goodness in the little old lady driving slowly in front of me, the elderly man fumbling with his change and delaying me at the cashier, the children squealing loudly as I'm attempting to concentrate on a book, the teenagers shouting along with their ear-splitting rap music, or the jackhammer operator whose deafening sounds fill the air with chaos. When I'm inspired, I see God realization, disguised as a minor blip, and the world looks fine, happy, and even peaceful. I remind myself of Rumi's sage advice, if you're irritated by every rub, how will you ever be polished? When I feel inspired, I notice how much zest I have for life and everything that I do. I play tennis with exuberance and without fatigue. I write from my heart. I feel good. I feel God. And this inner feeling radiates outward in all of my waking moments. Inspiration means doing what I love, and even more significantly, loving what I'm doing. It's my willingness to bring love and passion to the activities of my life, rather than looking for love to emerge from those events and activities. It's an attitude, and knowing this, I remember to pick a good one as often as possible. I know that being enthusiastic feels good, and I also know that I have the choice to select these attitudes at any and all times. By staying in spirit, these outlooks on life become second nature to me. By deciding to live an inspired life, I'm choosing to be in balance with a creative force that responds to my in-spirit thoughts. I'm also believing that I live in a friendly universe rather than an evil one, and feeling supported by it in a similar manner, being grateful for all that God sends my way. I'm not surprised when synchronistic events happen in my life. When I have someone on my mind who lives some distance from me, I actually expect that he or she will call me, and it occurs over and over and over. I know that thoughts are energy, and that those harmonizing with spirit will align to activate the creation process. I love watching all this flow so perfectly and being in harmony with the force that's responsible for all of creation. I know deep within me that I can participate in the activities of this force to bring into reality the manifestation of my spiritually aligned desires. Rather than hoping, wishing, and even praying for an outcome, my inner world aligns with the idea that what I desire is feasible and on its way. This kind of inspired knowing frees me from anxiety and worry. I affirm, it's on its way. There's absolutely nothing to fuss about. And I leave the time of its arrival into my life in the hands of the all-knowing, always creative spiritual source. I find that I no longer question the creator of the universe because I'm at peace with the timing of everything. I know enough now not to push the river, not to demand that the timetable of my ego be the same as God's. I know that by staying in spirit, I'm actually participating as a co-creator, and that the more I stay in this aligned space, the more it seems to speed up the process. I've noticed that ever since I've become more conscious of staying inspired, and all that this implies, the time between what I think and having it actually show up in my physical life has become shorter and shorter. I'm aware that the ultimate in manifestation is a complete absence of any delay between a thought and its physical manifestation. What's been called the gift of loaves and fishes is what true 100% God realization is. That is, think food and it appears. Think well-being for everyone and disease dissolves. While I know that this Christ consciousness is available for all of us, I have many more glimpses of it as I stay more in spirit. Singing my song. The major change that's taken place for me in this manifestation of my inspired desires has been the awareness of my own capacity for activating the creative force to work with me. Today, as I live consciously in spirit, I feel as if I'm more and more able to be an activator of this divine synchronistic force and have it work with me rather than to me. I view these mystical moments as holy instants when my ego is suspended and spirit, in conjunction with my own divine desires, has become the teacher. As my sense of inspiration grows within me, I find myself wanting to do more for others and focusing less upon myself. What I desire is realized through the paradoxical means of desiring it for others even more than I want it for myself. By reaching out in this way and deliberately looking for ways to inspire others, I feel closer and closer to spirit. And ironically, I sense that more of what I desire seems to be flowing back to me as a result of this sharing. At this point in my life, I feel that staying in this glorious state of inspiration practically requires me to avoid condemning others. I look at the behavior of others, even those whose actions are anathema to an inspired world, and I send them love. I know deep within me that declaring war on the problems of violence, poverty, cancer, AIDS, and drug addiction isn't the solution. I'm uninterested in increasing these problems with violent, angry, or hateful thoughts or behavior. I know that I can't get sick enough to make one person better, or angry enough to end violence anywhere. I also sense very strongly that by staying in spirit and bringing a higher mental energy to the presence of these lower, ego-based energies, I'm a force for change, one that helps move the world closer to spirit. I anticipate a planet at peace, along with health, abundance, and love in my life and in the lives of all others. And I know that it's moving in this direction. I know that for every act of apparent evil, there are a million acts of kindness. That's where I place my attention, and that's what I choose to give away. By doing so, for the larger percentage of my days, my reward is a feeling of being in harmony with purpose. I watch the mynah birds sing every morning, and I know they're not doing it because they have the answers to all of life's problems. They have a song inside of them that they obviously feel compelled to let come out. I too have a song to sing, and by staying in spirit, I'm able to sing it all day, every day. I know that the answer to what should I be doing is to see the word yes on my inner screen. Yes, I am listening. Yes, I am paying attention. And most important, yes, I am willing. I notice that those around me who feel uninspired are unwilling to say yes to the feelings at the core of their being. By doing so, to every hunch, burning desire, and thought that won't go away, I feel the hand of a guiding spirit that's with me simply because I've been willing to say yes. By saying yes to life, I see the world and all of its inhabitants in a completely new way. As a result of being more and more inspired, I see spirit in virtually everyone I meet. And I feel much more connected to everyone as a result of sensing their spirit instead of noticing all of the accumulations of success that they've amassed. I call this seeing with my mind and not my eyes. It now seems that my identity is associated with experiences that are not exclusively of this world. And I love what my mind sees. Possibilities and openings for miracles. It looks past the limitations of my eyes, and it knows that we're all one in an infinite world. My mind no longer views death as something to fear. Rather, it lives in an infinite place, and it is able to step back from this corporeal world and be an observer. Adequately conveying how I feel when I'm inspired is probably impossible. What I so sincerely want to share here is that the feeling of being completely in harmony with our source generates miracles everywhere. I have the delicious, spine-tingling sensation of bliss as I observe and interact in this world from the wondrous vista of being inspired. These words from A Course in Miracles ring true for me. All that must be recognized, however, is that birth was not the beginning and death is not the end. This is the knowing that I have from this infinite in-spirit perspective. There are no conflicts. All is as it should be. The things I wish to improve aren't going to be accomplished by fighting, but by placing my attention on staying connected to spirit. In 1 Corinthians, St. Paul says, "The very fact that you have lawsuits among you means you have been completely defeated already." As I live from a place of inspiration, I see that conflict is no longer possible for me, and I understand what Paul was attempting to say to the people of Corinth in that letter. I will not be defeated. I can't, because for me there's no they any longer. There's only us. I've turned my mind to spirit. I know that God created me to be like him, and I must be what I came from. This idea, more than any other, inspires me beyond what I can share here in this program. It's my intention to continue to stay inspired and live what my mind knows, rather than only what my eyes see. And my mind knows that we're all in a universe that has a creative, organizing intelligence supporting it. I know that it flows through me, and God willing, I'll stay in spirit and assist you to live that life of inspiration that you came here to live. There can be no greater blessing. I send you love. I surround you with light. And I invite you to live with me in spirit. God bless you. Namaste.